You will tell him that I'm ashamed." Sir Tobias Bromley delivered the instruction for the third time, as though repetition could make it belong to his daughter. Outside the carriage window, Kingscote House rose, pale and immaculate, above the Mayfair pavement, its brass fittings catching the clear morning light of the 8th of May 1817. Rebecca Bromley kept her hands folded over her reticule and looked at her father, instead of the ducal residence he had spent the entire journey describing as their last reasonable hope. "You will tell his grace," Sir Tobias continued, "that I fully intend to honor the bond. I require time, nothing more. The Bromley name has never failed a gentleman." Rebecca had heard that sentence before. She had also heard 3 different creditors called unreasonable within the past month. "Then perhaps you should tell him yourself." Her father's expression sharpened. "There is no advantage in making this confrontational. Entering the house where your creditor lives would not usually be considered confrontation." Rebecca, he used her name in the tone that had ended questions since childhood. "A private appeal will sound less calculated from you, because I did not incur the debt, because you are my daughter." The distinction appeared satisfactory to him. He opened the carriage door before a footman could approach. "This is duty, not debate." Rebecca looked from him to the stone steps. "You are not coming in. I will have the coachman circle the square. You will bring me his grace's answer." Sir Tobias lowered his voice. "Do not make difficulty where dignity will serve us better." Rebecca descended without accepting his hand. The carriage door shut behind her. A moment later, the wheels moved away, carrying the man whose shame she had been sent to deliver. For several seconds, she stood alone before Kingscote House, while a groom, farther down the street, led a pair of horses toward a neighboring stable entrance. There was no dramatic rain to hide in, no fog to soften the windows above her. London was offensively clear. Rebecca opened her reticule and took out a worn russet leather case. Inside lay a pair of small steel sewing scissors that had belonged to her mother. One pale thread had escaped the edge of Rebecca's cuff. She caught it between 2 fingers and clipped it neatly. Her mother had never possessed much patience for theatrical suffering. "Repair what can be repaired," she had once said while altering an old gown at a dining table, crowded with unpaid bills. "But do not call damage a virtue merely because you survived it." Rebecca closed the scissors and returned them to the case. Then the sound of hooves drew her attention toward the corner. A dark horse approached at an easy pace, ridden by a man whose posture made rank seem less like display than habit. Anthony Kingscote, Duke of Highmead, had returned from Hyde Park. Rebecca recognized him before he reached the house. They had been formally introduced twice earlier that season. At Lord Eversham's dinner, she had disagreed with a fashionable opinion about a translated poem and discovered, too late, that the Duke had been listening. At Lady Mercer's musicale, he had asked what she thought of the soprano. Rebecca had answered that the upper register was lovely and the lower register uncertain. He had laughed quietly instead of correcting her. Neither meeting had suggested that she would one day stand on his pavement carrying her father's apology. Anthony saw her as he dismounted. His groom took the reins. The Duke removed one glove as he crossed the remaining distance. His gaze moved once toward the departing Bromley carriage before settling on Rebecca. "Miss Bromley, Your Grace, I had not expected a call quite this early." "Neither had I." A faint change touched his expression. Not amusement exactly, attention. Was that Sir Tobias's carriage? Rebecca could have lied politely. She had been trained to soften facts almost as carefully as her mother had altered gowns. Yes. Anthony glanced toward the corner where the carriage had disappeared. Is he joining you? My father believes I can present his request more effectively alone. The Duke's face became very still. Does he? Rebecca regretted the bitterness that almost entered her voice. He has great confidence in my presentation. Anthony looked at her for a moment long enough to make evasion feel pointless. Then he stepped aside rather than toward her. My mother is at home. If you have come on family business, I would prefer that she join us before you present anything. Relief arrived so unexpectedly that Rebecca nearly resented it. That would be appropriate, and considerably less interesting to the servants. His dryness eased something in her chest. He led the way inside without touching her. The entrance hall smelled faintly of beeswax and fresh flowers. No one stared openly, though Rebecca had enough experience in strained households to know when servants were deliberately not staring. Within minutes, she had been shown into a morning room where the Dowager Duchess of Highmead received her with quiet courtesy and no visible surprise. Tea appeared. Rebecca placed Sir Tobias's calling card on the table between herself and Anthony. Her father's rehearsed sentences gathered in her mind with perfect obedience. That was the trouble with long practice. Shame could become fluent. My father has sent me to apologize. Anthony did not reach for the tea. For what? The bond held by Highmead. He is ashamed that payment has not been made when expected, and he wishes me to assure you that he intends to honor it if you will allow him additional time. Did you sign the bond? Rebecca blinked. No. Did you borrow the money? No. Did you promise to repay it? No. The Dowager Duchess lowered her cup without a sound. Anthony leaned back slightly. Then you do not owe me an apology. Rebecca had prepared herself for refusal, disdain, bargaining, even the polite cruelty of being reminded that her father's financial failures had become visible to a man powerful enough to matter. She had not prepared for the possibility that someone might refuse the premise entirely. Your Grace, my father asked me to explain his position. He may explain it himself. He is outside. He was outside. Anthony's eyes flicked toward the window. At present he appears to be making an unusually determined study of this square. Rebecca looked down before the laugh escaped her. It still escaped, though only as a breath. Anthony stood. From his waistcoat he withdrew a small key and crossed to a locked dispatch box set upon a writing desk near the wall. He opened it and removed a folded document. Rebecca recognized Sir Tobias's signature before she recognized anything else. Anthony brought the paper to the table and laid it down carefully. The original Highmead bond, matured, intact, uncancelled. He placed one hand beside it rather than over it. This is the obligation in question. Rebecca looked at her father's name on the paper. Anthony's voice softened, but not into pity. Your father's debt is on this paper, Miss Bromley. You are not. For one dangerous second she could not answer. She had spent years being told that family difficulty became family duty the moment it threatened reputation. She knew how to negotiate a tradesman's patience, how to make a delayed payment sound temporary, how to receive a disappointed creditor without allowing humiliation to reach the servants' hall. No one had ever asked whether those obligations were hers. Rebecca lowered her eyes to the calling card because it was easier than allowing the Duke to see what his sentence had done. When she looked up again, Anthony was watching her with the same unsettling attention he had shown at the musicale. You seem disappointed, he said. I had prepared a much better apology. That is unfortunate. I suspect it would have been excellent. My father usually prefers them polished. Your father and I may discover several differences in taste. Rebecca reached for Sir Tobias's calling card at the same moment Anthony did. Their gloved fingertips brushed across the edge of the card. The contact lasted no more than an instant. Anthony withdrew first. Something unreadable passed through his eyes before he picked up the card by its opposite corner and offered it to her. Rebecca accepted it without touching him again. "Thank you. You are welcome." The formality returned, but not entirely. Anthony turned toward the door. "Parker." A footman appeared almost immediately. "Yes, Your Grace." "Sir Tobias Bromley's carriage is circling the square. Please ask the coachman to stop when he next passes the house." Rebecca stared at Anthony. "You intend to bring my father inside?" "I do. He will not enjoy that. I am not arranging it for his enjoyment." The Dowager Duchess hid the beginning of a smile behind her teacup. Rebecca slipped the calling card back into her reticule beside the russet case. "What will you tell him?" Anthony looked once at the uncancelled bond lying between them, then back at her. "The truth first." Footsteps sounded in the hall as Parker went to intercept the carriage. Anthony's expression settled into calm purpose. "And after that, Miss Bromley, I intend to give your father an answer he has not anticipated." Sir Tobias entered the morning room with the expression of a man who had been inconvenienced by being required to account for himself. Park closed the door behind him, leaving the Dowager Duchess seated near the tea table, Rebecca beside the window, and Anthony standing where the original Highmead bond still lay in plain view. Sir Tobias's eyes found the document first. Then they moved to Rebecca. "You should have returned to the carriage." Rebecca folded her hands. "His Grace preferred otherwise. I gathered as much." Sir Tobias turned to Anthony and gave a bow precise enough to satisfy etiquette while conveying no gratitude. "Your Grace, I understand my daughter has explained the temporary difficulty." "She explained that you sent her to explain it." Sir Tobias's jaw tightened. "I thought a private appeal more suitable." "Private for whom? I beg your pardon?" Anthony rested 2 fingers beside the bond. "You owe the money. Miss Bromley did not borrow it, sign for it, or promise its repayment. Yet you remained in the carriage while she came inside to apologize." Sir Tobias's face took on the patient look. Rebecca knew too well. It was the expression he used when someone else insisted on distinguishing between 2 facts he preferred to blend together. A daughter represents her family, not as collateral. The room became very still. Rebecca looked at Anthony. His voice had not risen. That made the words land harder. Sir Tobias glanced toward the Dowager Duchess, perhaps hoping rank and age would make her uncomfortable enough to intervene. She merely lifted her teacup. "I did not suggest collateral," he said. "No, you suggested duty." Anthony's gaze remained steady. "Let us discuss the debt without involving your daughter." Sir Tobias adjusted one cuff. "Very well, I require an extension. My position is fundamentally sound, but several expectations have not matured on the timetable anticipated. I am prepared to honor every obligation." Rebecca lowered her eyes for a moment. She had heard versions of those sentences since she was 17. Anthony did not appear impressed by their polish. "My solicitor will review the position," he said. "I am not granting an extension this morning." Sir Tobias stared at him. "Then why summon me back?" "Because there is another matter." A subtle change passed through the room. Rebecca felt it before she understood it. Anthony turned from Sir Tobias and looked at her. "Miss Bromley, Your Grace, I have been considering marriage this season. Sir Tobias went entirely still. Rebecca did not. Years of practice had taught her how to remain composed when a conversation became dangerous. That is a significant change of subject. It may be. The corner of Anthony's mouth moved. I am trying not to presume upon the conclusion. Sir Tobias looked from one to the other. Highmead, surely you are not suggesting. I am suggesting nothing to you. Anthony's tone sharpened just enough to stop him. I am speaking to Miss Bromley. Rebecca's pulse changed. She had attended enough dinners to know that dukes did not ask questions casually when marriage was attached to them. Then speak plainly. Anthony did. Would you consider becoming my wife? Sir Tobias made a sound. Rebecca had never heard from him before. It was not quite relief and not quite triumph, but it contained enough of both to make her stomach tighten. She kept her attention on Anthony. Why? He seemed unsurprised by the question. Because I intend to marry eventually. Because rank is a poor substitute for character. Because I have met you before today and remembered you afterward. Rebecca's brows rose. From 2 conversations. One at Lord Eversham's dinner, when everyone else praised a translation you said had flattened the original into something respectable and dull. It had. I know. You agreed, not entirely. His eyes warmed. That is partly why I remembered it. Rebecca almost smiled. Anthony continued. And at Lady Mercer's music-hale, when I asked what you thought of the soprano, you said the upper register was lovely and the lower register uncertain. It was uncertain. You were the only person within 10 feet who said so. Sir Tobias shifted impatiently. Surely this can be discussed with greater practical clarity. Anthony did not look at him. I am trying to discuss it with clarity. Rebecca studied him. You are proposing marriage because I disagree with people? Not exclusively. Reassuring. You did not flatter me. You did not perform embarrassment today for my benefit. You tried to carry your father's obligation with dignity. But when I told you it was not yours, you did not immediately turn that into another performance. I suspect you would tell me when I am wrong. Frequently, if necessary. That is what concerns me. This time she did smile, briefly. Sir Tobias stepped forward. If this is serious, then naturally certain arrangements between the families can be regularized. Rebecca's smile disappeared. Anthony turned to him. No. Sir Tobias blinked. No? Her answer will not alter the Highmead bond. I did not say. You did not need to. Anthony's voice remained calm. If Miss Bromley refuses me, your debt will be handled exactly as it would have been had I never asked. If she accepts me, your debt will still be handled on its own terms. Sir Tobias's face changed. You cannot expect marriage to create no connection between financial interests. It will create no right to use your daughter as payment. Rebecca felt the words strike somewhere deep and old. Sir Tobias looked toward her then, not as a father consulting his daughter, but as a man watching an asset acquire conditions. Rebecca, you understand what is being offered? Yes, then answer his grace. Anthony moved before she did, though only by half a step. No. Sir Tobias's eyes narrowed. I beg your pardon. She will answer when she chooses. Anthony looked at Rebecca. And if the answer is no, Miss Bromley, nothing becomes worse for your father because of it. The room seemed to contract around that sentence. Rebecca had not realized until then how fully she had expected every choice to carry a hidden punishment. Say no, and the debt worsens. Resist, and the family suffers. Refuse, and someone else pays. Anthony had removed that weapon before asking for anything. She looked at Sir Tobias. His expectation was unmistakable. He believed only one reasonable answer existed. That belief made Rebecca certain of her next words. "I will not answer while my father is in the room." Sir Tobias stared at her. "Rebecca." "No." Her voice was quiet. "If His Grace is asking me, then I will answer as myself. You are being theatrical. I learned from experts." The Dowager Duchess coughed delicately into her hand. Anthony's mouth tightened as if suppressing amusement. Sir Tobias's face flushed. "Your Grace, surely you see the absurdity." "I see a woman asking for privacy before deciding whether to marry me." Anthony gestured toward the door. "I consider that reasonable. You are allowing her to treat this as though it has no consequences." Rebecca turned to him. "It has consequences for me." Sir Tobias opened his mouth, then stopped. For once, no polished sentence came quickly enough. Anthony picked up the original Highmead bond and folded it carefully along its existing crease. He slid it into a plain cover from the desk. "This will be sent to my solicitor today for secure custody. Its treatment will not depend upon your daughter's answer." Sir Tobias looked at the covered document, then at Rebecca. "You will regret confusing independence with ingratitude." Rebecca held his gaze. "Perhaps, but I will regret answering under pressure more." He bowed to the Dowager Duchess, then to Anthony. His bow to Rebecca was the briefest of all. When Parker opened the door, Sir Tobias left without looking back. The room remained silent until his footsteps disappeared down the hall. The Dowager Duchess set down her cup. "I believe I shall ask the housekeeper whether luncheon has been entirely forgotten." Rebecca understood the kindness in the excuse. Anthony did too. "Thank you, Mother." When she left, the door remained open, and a footman stayed within call in the corridor. Anthony did not move closer to Rebecca. "You are not obliged to answer now." "Good." That sounded emphatic. It was intended to. He waited. Rebecca looked at the plain cover containing her father's bond. Soon it would leave the house and cease to be something Anthony could casually produce from his own desk. That mattered. He was separating the debt from the question he had asked her. "You said you are considering marriage," she said. "Yes. You said I might be someone with whom you could make a good one." "Yes. That is not the same as saying you love me." "No." The honesty steadied her. "Do you expect me to pretend otherwise?" "No." "Do you expect gratitude?" "No." "Do you expect obedience?" Anthony paused. "I expect honesty. Obedience would be disappointing." Rebecca looked at him for a long moment. "Then I will hear your terms." Something changed in his face, not triumph. Attention again, but warmer now. "And yours?" "Especially mine." "Very well." Rebecca lifted her chin. "Then understand this, Your Grace. If you want my answer, you will not get it by speaking first and calling the rest agreement." Anthony's gaze held hers. "Then tell me what you require." Rebecca felt for the first time that morning that the next words might belong entirely to her. At 11 o'clock the following morning, Rebecca entered the blue morning room at Kingscote House with the uneasy sense that the most consequential conversation of her life had been reduced, at least outwardly, to paper, ink, and 4 people speaking in measured tones. The Dowager Duchess sat near the window with a small work-basket untouched beside her. Mr. Bellamy, Anthony's solicitor, had arranged several documents on the table. Anthony stood opposite him, one hand resting on the back of a chair rather than on the papers themselves. The original Highmead bond was not among them. As Anthony had promised, it had been sent under cover to his solicitor the previous afternoon for secure custody. Rebecca noticed its absence immediately. She also noticed that no one had placed Sir Tobias's debts among the documents discussing her future. That mattered more than she expected. Mr. Bellamy rose when she entered. Miss Bromley. Mr. Bellamy. Anthony waited until she had taken her seat before sitting. The solicitor began without ceremony. Rebecca's maternal property amounted to a little more than £3,000, presently held under existing trustees. The proposed settlement would preserve it for her separate use after marriage. Sir Tobias would acquire no right to direct it, borrow against it, or use it to satisfy his own obligations. Rebecca listened carefully. Years of carrying her father's explanations had trained her to hear the difference between what a sentence appeared to promise and what it actually said. "When you say for my separate use," she said, "do you mean that my father cannot obtain access merely because I marry?" Mr. Bellamy looked pleased rather than offended by the interruption. "Precisely, and His Grace cannot simply hand that fund to my father if he later decides generosity requires it." The Dowager Duchess's brows lifted. Anthony looked directly at Rebecca. Mr. Bellamy answered first, not as though it were his own property to dispose of. The trust would remain governed by its terms. Good. Rebecca glanced down at the draft. Then please make that language as difficult to misunderstand as possible. Anthony's mouth moved faintly. "Bellamy has just discovered why I remembered you. Because I read documents. Because you distrust elegant phrasing. Only when elegance is being asked to carry money." Mr. Bellamy concealed a smile by adjusting one page. The remaining provisions were explained more briefly. Rebecca would receive the customary personal provision and jointure appropriate to Anthony's rank. Nothing in the marriage settlement discharged Sir Tobias's existing obligations. The Highmead bond remained a separate matter between the Duke's financial interest and Sir Tobias. No phrase in the settlement made Anthony's responsible for Tobias's other creditors. Rebecca did not ask for a recital of every technical clause. She asked only enough to be certain of the three things that mattered. Her mother's money remained protected. Her father could not reach it. Marriage would not quietly transform his debts into Anthony's. When the papers had been reviewed, Mr. Bellamy gathered his notes. "I can have the final form prepared promptly, assuming both parties remain satisfied." Rebecca looked at Anthony. "I am not satisfied yet." The solicitor paused. Anthony did not. "Then we are not finished." Something inside Rebecca eased at the absence of embarrassment in his answer. The Dowager Duchess rose. "Mr. Bellamy, perhaps you will walk with me as far as the front hall. I have a question concerning an old family trust that will almost certainly bore these two." "Your Grace." The excuse was transparent and therefore kind. The Dowager Duchess left with the solicitor. The door remained open, and a footman stood within call beyond the corridor. Rebecca waited until their footsteps faded. Anthony remained where he was. "You wanted terms of your own." "Yes, I am listening." Rebecca rested one hand on the closed draft settlement. "My father has other creditors." Anthony's expression did not change. "I assumed he might. I do not know the full extent. Neither do I. He does not tell me everything. He tells me enough to make me useful." Anthony's gaze sharpened, but he did not interrupt. Rebecca continued. "If I marry you, people will assume his position has improved. My father will encourage that assumption if it helps him. Likely, and creditors may believe that becoming your father-in-law makes him safer, also likely. I do not want my marriage used as a bridge from his debts to you." Anthony was silent for a moment. "Say exactly what you are asking." Rebecca had prepared the sentence overnight, then discarded every polished version before breakfast. "Do not settle my father's other creditors merely because I become your wife. Anthony leaned back slightly. There may be circumstances where refusing to act harms people who did not create the debt. Then tell me. If the matter is urgent, tell me. If delay makes the harm worse. Rebecca held his gaze. Then tell me quickly. A flicker of humor appeared, but she did not smile. I mean it, Anthony. It was the first time she had used his Christian name. The sound seemed to surprise both of them. He did not correct her. I know. Do not decide in my name and explain it afterward. Do not tell yourself that because the money is yours, the choice cannot concern me. If my father's conduct creates a situation that touches my household, my reputation, or people who may suffer because of it, speak to me first. Anthony's expression had gone still in a way Rebecca was beginning to understand. He was not offended. He was testing the weight of what he might promise before he gave it. Suppose I believe immediate action is necessary. Then we discuss it. Suppose you disagree. Then you will at least know that you are acting against my expressed wish rather than pretending you had my permission. Silence settled between them. Rebecca heard a carriage pass outside and the faint sound of someone speaking in the corridor below. Anthony looked down at the papers, though nothing on them could answer for him. You are asking for something harder than financial separation. Yes, you are asking me to treat consultation as part of the promise. Yes. He looked back at her. Then I will. Rebecca did not move. Precisely. Anthony's voice became very clear. I will not settle Sir Tobias Bromley's other creditors merely because you become my wife. If circumstances arise that affect you, I will tell you. If action is needed, I will not use your name, your position, or our marriage as permission you never gave. Rebecca felt the words enter the room with more force than any legal clause Mr. Bellamy had read. Even if keeping that promise is inconvenient, Anthony's eyes did not leave hers, especially then. She thought of the original bond already in a solicitor's custody rather than lying on Anthony's desk. She thought of the way he had refused to accept an apology that did not belong to her. None of that made him infallible. She did not want infallibility. She wanted the right to remain a person beside him. Then I accept. Anthony's breathing changed almost imperceptibly. You accept the terms. I accept the marriage. For the first time since she entered, he looked genuinely unguarded, not triumphant, relieved. Rebecca, you may regret asking for honesty. I expect to regret it frequently. Good, then we understand one another. Later that afternoon, Rebecca returned to Bromley House in her father's carriage and found Sir Tobias waiting in the drawing room before she had removed her gloves. Well, he asked. I accepted. Relief transformed him so quickly that for one instant he looked almost younger. And what has Highmead agreed to do about the debts? Rebecca stood very still. Nothing through me. Sir Tobias's expression hardened. Do not be childish. My maternal fund remains protected. You will have no access to it. The Highmead bond remains unchanged. His other, financial dealings with you are not part of the marriage. You are to become a duchess, Rebecca. Yes. And you mean to pretend that creates no duty to your family. Rebecca looked at the man who had sent her to another gentleman's house, carrying his shame, and now spoke as though elevation increased his claim upon her. I intend to remember exactly which duties are mine. Sir Tobias stared at her. Rebecca removed one glove finger by finger, her voice remaining calm. That distinction is going to matter. By the evening of the 11th May, London had already begun improving upon the facts of Rebecca Bromley's engagement. According to one version, the Duke of Highmead had rescued an impoverished baronet's daughter out of pity. According to another, Sir Tobias had somehow converted a matured bond into a ducal marriage. A third version, whispered with greater admiration than morality, suggested Rebecca herself had gone to Kingscote House, knowing exactly what might be won if she appeared sufficiently distressed. None of those stories resembled the morning Anthony had refused her apology, but accuracy had never possessed the social advantages of invention. Sir Tobias mentioned the rumours as their carriage stopped before Lady Wexford's Mayfair house. "You need only be agreeable tonight." Rebecca looked at him. What an alarming instruction. "Lady Teresa Ormsby will be present. I am aware that she exists. Her father is the Earl of Ormsby. I was aware of that as well." Sir Tobias frowned. For 2 seasons people have considered her an obvious prospect for Highmead. Rebecca had heard the same thing. Lady Teresa was beautiful, accomplished, well-connected, and so accustomed to being placed near Anthony at dinners that London had gradually converted proximity into expectation. Anthony had never courted her formally. That had not prevented half the season from treating the imagined match as though only a date remained to be chosen. "Then she may be disappointed," Rebecca said. "Do not provoke her. I had planned to overturn a table before supper. Rebecca," she turned toward the carriage door, "I will endeavour to disappoint you instead." Lady Wex's drawing rooms were bright with candlelight, and crowded enough to ensure that every private remark had at least 3 accidental witnesses. Rebecca entered beside her father, conscious of glances, then refused to count them. Lady Wexford received her warmly, perhaps from kindness, and perhaps because a woman newly engaged to a duke had become the most useful guest in Mayfair. Anthony arrived a few minutes later with the Dowager Duchess. He did not cross the room directly toward Rebecca. He greeted his hostess, spoke to an elderly relation, and only then came to her, with the composure expected of a man who had no need to advertise where his attention rested. "Miss Bromley." "Your Grace." His gaze held hers for 1 beat longer than courtesy required. "Have you survived the congratulations?" "So far, although 2 ladies have already informed me how fortunate I am, how thoughtful of them. I had been unable to assess my own condition." The faintest smile appeared. "Then society has saved you the effort." Before Rebecca could answer, Lady Teresa Ormsby approached. She wore ivory silk and carried herself with the calm assurance of a woman who had spent years entering rooms already certain of her welcome. Her dark hair was arranged without excess, and her expression contained no trace of the disappointment others had eagerly assigned to her. "Your Grace." She acknowledged Anthony first, then turned to Rebecca. "Miss Bromley, may I offer my congratulations?" "Thank you." The announcement surprised everyone. That seems to be its chief public virtue. Teresa smiled. "You must find the sudden change in circumstances extraordinary." The words were harmless. The emphasis was not. Rebecca had spent too many years listening to her father reshape meaning through tone to miss it. "Marriage generally changes circumstances," she said. "So I am told." Teresa's gaze flicked toward Sir Tobias across the room. Some old difficulties must seem much smaller when circumstances improve so dramatically. Anthony's attention sharpened. Rebecca felt it beside her, but he did not speak. That restraint mattered. Teresa had addressed Rebecca, and Anthony allowed Rebecca the dignity of answering. "Some difficulties become smaller," Rebecca said. "Others merely become more visible." Teresa's smile remained polished. "I am not sure I understand." "Then I would not presume to explain what you did not mean." For the first time, something cool entered Teresa's eyes. It vanished almost immediately. You are very direct. Only when indirectness becomes tiring. Lady Wexford called Teresa toward another guest before the exchange could sharpen further. Anthony watched her go, then looked at Rebecca. Should I be alarmed? Not unless you intend to discuss my father's accounts over the fish. I had planned to wait until dessert. Rebecca glanced at him. Your courtship remains unusual. I have received very little guidance. Dinner passed beneath layers of politeness. Rebecca was seated according to her present rank. Not the one she would acquire after marriage, which suited her perfectly. Teresa sat farther down the table and did not address her directly again, though Rebecca noticed twice that the woman's attention returned whenever Sir Tobias spoke. After the gentlemen rejoined the ladies, the rooms grew warmer and more crowded. Rebecca found herself gradually pressed toward one side of the drawing room by a cluster of guests determined to discuss wedding clothes, without admitting they were actually discussing money. A sofa blocked her left. A marble-topped table narrowed the space behind her. Ahead stood Sir Tobias speaking with two gentlemen, and beyond him Teresa near the doorway. Rebecca could retreat toward a side passage, but doing so would look exactly like retreat. She was deciding whether that mattered when she saw Anthony across the room. He had noticed. He did not beckon. He did not come striding toward her as though she required extraction. Instead, during the course of an apparently ordinary conversation, he shifted his position and induced two gentlemen beside him to move with him. The adjustment opened a broad path through the center of the room. A second, narrower route remained along the wall, quieter and almost private. Rebecca understood immediately. He had made space without choosing what she should do with it. She looked toward the narrow route. It would be easier. Then she looked at Teresa and Sir Tobias near the visible path. Rebecca stepped forward through the center of the room. Anthony did not hurry to meet her. He matched her pace from several feet away, letting the decision remain visibly hers. Only after they had crossed the most crowded portion did he offer his arm. Rebecca looked at it, then placed her gloved hand lightly upon his sleeve. You gave me two ways out. Yes. Why? Because I did not know which one you wanted. She studied him. Most men would have decided. Most men are fortunate not to be marrying you. That sounded almost insulting. It was intended as self-preservation. Rebecca felt a smile pull at her mouth. I chose the visible route. I noticed. You expected that, I hoped. Why? Anthony glanced toward her father. Because you should not have to disappear, merely to make other people comfortable. The words warmed her more than flattery would have done. She let her hand remain on his arm until they reached the Dowager Duchess, then withdrew it herself. Across the room, Teresa was watching. A few minutes later, Rebecca saw her cross toward Sir Tobias near a window. Teresa said something too quietly for Rebecca to hear. Sir Tobias's expression changed from guarded to pleased. Whatever answer he gave, Teresa listened closely. Rebecca stored the detail without deciding what it meant. The next morning, before Rebecca had finished breakfast at Bromley House, a servant brought Sir Tobias a folded notice. He read it once and went pale beneath the remnants of his morning temper. Rebecca set down her cup. What is it? He folded the paper too quickly. Nothing that concerns you. That answer had become useful enough to make Rebecca distrust it on principle. Then why are you hiding it? Sir Tobias looked toward the door, lowered his voice, and finally handed her the notice. A separate creditor, entirely unconnected to the Highmead bond, had demanded satisfaction of an overdue obligation. If payment was not forthcoming, arrangements would begin to value household goods against the debt. Rebecca read the final line twice. How long? Long enough. That is not a length of time. I will manage it. With what? Sir Tobias's eyes hardened. You are about to become Duchess of Highmead. I suggest you remember that before asking what resources this family possesses. Rebecca looked at the notice again. The threat was not to her marriage settlement, nor to the Highmead bond, already in a solicitor's custody. It was another debt entirely, and for the first time since Anthony had given his promise, Rebecca understood that keeping it might soon become far more difficult than either of them had expected. By the afternoon of the 13th of May, Kingscote House had acquired the disciplined disorder of a household preparing for a wedding. That London had decided must be either romantic triumph or financial scandal. Parcels arrived. Dressmakers sent messages. Footmen carried boxes between rooms with the solemnity of diplomats. Rebecca had spent the morning with the Dowager Duchess, reviewing invitations and practical arrangements, when a young maid named Martha appeared in the doorway, holding a length of ivory ribbon with a torn edge. Behind her stood Mrs. Hales, one of the senior housemaids, wearing the expression of a woman who had already reached a verdict. Miss Bromley, Mrs. Hales said. Martha was carrying the trimming box when this was found damaged. Martha's face had gone pale. I didn't tear it, ma'am. Rebecca took the ribbon and examined the ragged section. Did anyone see it happen? Mrs. Hales hesitated. No. Was the ribbon inspected before Martha carried the box? Not specifically. Rebecca looked at the girl. Then we know she carried damaged ribbon. We do not know when it was damaged. Mrs. Hales opened her mouth. Rebecca handed the ribbon back gently. Correct carelessness when you can prove it. Do not invent another fault because it is convenient. The older woman colored slightly, then inclined her head. Yes, Miss Bromley. Martha whispered thanks, but Rebecca shook her head. Do not thank me for refusing to accuse you without evidence. Help, Mrs. Hales, check the rest of the trimming instead. Once they had gone, Rebecca opened her reticule and took out the worn russet leather case. The little steel sewing scissors inside had belonged to her mother. She clipped away the worst of the frayed ribbon, leaving enough sound material to be used elsewhere. You appear to have saved the wedding. Anthony's voice came from the doorway. Rebecca looked up. He wore a dark morning coat and carried several folded papers beneath one arm. London may recover. I am relieved. I had feared civilization depended upon ivory ribbon. Only fashionable civilization. He came farther into the room and stopped beside the table. The Dowager Duchess, who had watched the exchange from a nearby chair, glanced at the scissors. Those are very neat. Rebecca looked down at them. They were my mother's. Anthony's expression changed slightly. You mentioned her once. Not much. Rebecca closed the blades, but did not return them to the case yet. She used them constantly. My father spent for years as though prosperity were always expected in the next quarter. My mother learned to make gowns survive longer than anyone else believed respectable. The Dowager Duchess's face softened, a useful skill. She thought necessity became less humiliating when one admitted it honestly. Rebecca ran one thumb over the worn leather case. She used to say there was no shame in repair, only in pretending something had never been damaged when it had. Anthony looked at the scissors, then at Rebecca. I think I would have liked her. She would have tested you first. I am beginning to see a family resemblance. The Dowager Duchess rose with a quiet smile. I must speak to Mrs. Pritchard about the wedding breakfast before the kitchen interprets my silence as permission. She left them with the door open and servants moving occasionally through the corridor beyond. Anthony remained standing for a moment after his mother disappeared. Rebecca noticed the papers under his arm. Work? Some of it. And the rest? An excuse to walk into a room where I heard you were arguing about ribbon. I was not arguing. Of course not. I was correcting an unsupported conclusion. That sounds far more dangerous. Rebecca smiled, then saw his attention return to the scissors. You are thinking about something. Anthony set the papers on the table. My father. She waited. He had spoken of the late Duke only in formal terms before. Anthony's hands rested lightly against the chair back. He was considered extremely dependable. Was he not? In public matters, generally, if he gave a gentleman his word, everyone knew it would be kept. Rebecca heard the qualification. And in private, Anthony looked toward the window. With my mother, he had a habit of believing a good reason changed the nature of a promise. His voice remained even, but the restraint cost him something. He would promise to remain in London for a family occasion, then leave because politics seemed urgent. He would promise to consult her before allowing a relative to occupy Highmead Park for a season, then decide the matter himself because he believed the arrangement sensible. He would tell her that certain household decisions were hers, then alter them when he thought he understood the consequences better. Rebecca said nothing. Anthony continued. He never considered himself dishonest. That was the difficulty. He always had an explanation, a reasonable one. Usually, he looked back at her. He believed a reasonable motive transformed a broken promise into something else. Rebecca felt the words settle between them. The similarity to her father's changing definitions was not exact, but it was close enough to matter. And you decided to be different. I decided that a word means very little if it keeps changing, whenever keeping it becomes inconvenient. Rebecca remembered the promise Anthony had given her only 4 days earlier. If circumstances arise that affect you, I will tell you. The memory did not make her suspicious. It made his confession feel more intimate than a compliment would have done. He had shown her the standard by which he judged himself. Anthony's gaze dropped to her hand resting near the russet case. He did not reach for it. May I? Rebecca's breath caught at the simplicity of the question. She left her gloved hand where it was and turned it slightly toward him. Yes, Anthony placed his hand over hers. No pressure, no possession. Warmth passed through the layers of their gloves with surprising clarity. Rebecca looked at their joined hands, then at his face. Slowly, she turned her palm beneath his. His fingers shifted in answer, not closing tightly, only acknowledging the movement she had chosen. Neither spoke for several seconds. The scissors lay beside their hands, small and ordinary, while something less ordinary took shape in the quiet. Anthony finally said, I do not want to make easy promises to you. Good. That was not the response I expected. Easy promises are usually the ones people explain away first. His thumb moved once against the side of her glove, then stilled. Rebecca did not withdraw. Then I will try for difficult ones. Before she could answer, footsteps approached. Anthony released her hand before Mr. Carden appeared in the open doorway carrying a memorandum. The agent bowed. Your Grace, Miss Bromley. Anthony's expression sharpened immediately. Is it urgent? I believe so. Rebecca saw Mr. Carden glance toward her. Anthony noticed. If it concerns Sir Tobias, speak plainly. Rebecca added, I would rather know than be protected from the existence of it. Mr. Carden inclined his head. The separate creditor who issued Yesterday's warning intends to proceed against household goods within 48 hours if the account remains unsatisfied. Rebecca felt her fingers tighten around the closed scissors. And the servants? Anthony asked. I have confirmed 7 with wages significantly in arrears. There may be more. If the household is broken up, several could lose their positions before recovering what they are owed. Anthony's face became unreadable. Can their wages be settled directly without satisfying the creditor? Possibly. I can investigate it, but paying wages alone would not necessarily prevent valuation of the goods or disruption of the household. Then investigate first. Yes, Your Grace. Mr. Carden hesitated. The creditor is not inclined to delay. Rebecca looked at Anthony. He looked back at her, and for one brief moment she thought of the promise between them. Then he turned to Carden. You said 48 hours. At most. Anthony was silent. Rebecca returned the scissors to their russet case and closed it carefully. Mr. Carden waited. At last, Anthony asked, if nothing else will delay him, how much would stop him? Mr. Carden answered Anthony's question that afternoon, but Anthony did not authorize payment then. Instead, he instructed the agent to seek a brief delay while investigating whether the servant's wages could be protected directly. The creditor, after considerable persuasion and the assurance that a definite answer would come, agreed to postpone action until the morning after the wedding. Rebecca knew of the delay. She also knew no account had yet been satisfied. That distinction allowed the days before the 18th May to pass, without forcing either of them to revisit the promise Anthony had made. By the morning of the wedding, the marriage settlement had been executed. Rebecca's maternal fund remained secured for her separate use, and Sir Tobias had received no relief from the Highmead bond. St. George's, Hanover Square, stood quiet beneath a pale London sky when Rebecca arrived. The ceremony was not large. Anthony had resisted every suggestion that half the fashionable world needed to witness what was to him a promise rather than a spectacle. The Dowager Duchess stood near Rebecca with composed affection. Sir Tobias occupied his proper place and wore the expression of a man determined to appear satisfied with circumstances he had not been allowed to control. Mr. Bellamy attended because the settlement had been completed, and because Anthony preferred all necessary formalities settled before vows began. Rebecca stood at the entrance for one moment longer than required. She had imagined marriage many times in the abstract, and never once like this. Not with a duke who had first refused an apology she had been trained to deliver. Not with her father's debts still existing exactly where they belonged. Not with her own answer having mattered at every stage. Anthony turned when she approached. His expression changed so slightly that no one else might have seen it. Rebecca did. Relief, not possession. You came, he said quietly. Rebecca raised one brow. You sound surprised. I was trying not to assume. That is becoming a habit. A useful one, I hope. We shall see. His mouth moved at the corner. Then the clergyman began, and whatever humor had passed between them settled into something more solemn. Anthony spoke his vows with the same precision he had used when promising not to decide in Rebecca's name. Rebecca heard every word. She also heard her own voice answering. There was no sudden transformation when the ceremony ended. No instant feeling that the old Rebecca Bromley had disappeared. Yet when she signed the register and later heard herself addressed as the Duchess of Highmead, the title did not feel like something bestowed by her father's ambition or purchased by Anthony's rank. It felt attached to a choice she had made herself. Sir Tobias approached before they left the church. "Highmead," he said, with a cordiality too deliberate to be natural. "I trust, now that the families are formally joined, certain practical matters may become easier." Anthony looked at him. Rebecca felt, rather than saw, the change in his posture. "The marriage alters none of your existing obligations, Sir Tobias." Her father's smile thinned. "Naturally, I meant only that family. Considerations may permit greater flexibility. If flexibility becomes appropriate, my solicitor will discuss it with you as he would have before this morning." Sir Tobias glanced toward Rebecca. "Your daughter may feel differently once she understands the burdens of her new position." Rebecca answered before Anthony could. "Your Grace has already understood my position perfectly." Tobias gave her a look that promised a later argument. Rebecca did not intend to provide one. Anthony offered his hand to help her into the carriage. Once the door closed behind them and the church steps disappeared from view, silence settled. It was not uncomfortable. It was simply private, and privacy had become unexpectedly precious. Anthony sat opposite her for several moments before speaking. "There is something I want to make clear before we reach Kingscote House." Rebecca folded her hands in her lap. "That sounds grave for a man married less than half an hour." "I hope it is the opposite." His gaze held hers. "Being my wife gives me no right to assume affection, access, or physical intimacy you have not chosen." Rebecca did not move. Anthony continued. "Our rooms will adjoin. The connecting door will remain closed unless you decide otherwise. If you want company, ask. If you want solitude, say so. I will not make either answer difficult." The carriage wheels struck a shallow rut and recovered. Rebecca looked at him carefully. "You prepared that speech." "I considered it. Several times. Enough to make it worse." A small smile touched her mouth. "It is not entirely unsuccessful." High praise. She lowered her eyes to the space between them. The memory of his hand over hers beside her mother's scissors returned with surprising clarity. Then he had asked first. Now he had given her a boundary, without demanding reassurance in return. Rebecca moved her right hand across the narrow distance between their seats and rested it palm upward beside his knee. Anthony looked down. He did not immediately touch her. Rebecca waited. At last she said, "You are allowed to take it." His eyes lifted to hers. "You are certain?" "I am beginning to think you enjoy asking me that. I am beginning to think the answer matters." "It does." Rebecca curled her fingers slightly. "Take my hand, Anthony." He did. His palm was warm through her glove, his grip careful, until Rebecca closed her own fingers around his. Something in his face softened. The gesture was simple, but the simplicity made it intimate. She had chosen it. No priest had ordered it. No father had suggested it. No title required it. They remained that way as the carriage moved through Mayfair, hands joined between them. Rebecca looked once toward the window, then back at him. "You should know that I still intend to disagree with you. Marriage has already ruined all my hopes. I am pleased to hear it, and I intend to disagree with you in return. Less frequently, I trust. That depends entirely upon your accuracy." She laughed. Anthony's fingers tightened gently around hers in answer. By the time they reached Kingscote House, Rebecca had stopped thinking of the gesture as reassurance and begun to think of it as the first thing in theirs marriage that belonged only to them. That evening, while Rebecca sat with the Dowager Duchess, reviewing the household arrangements that would now concern her, Mr. Carden arrived at Anthony's study with the final report. Anthony closed the door behind him. "You found no other means?" not one that prevents the creditor from proceeding, Your Grace. The wages can be paid directly. That would help the servants themselves, but it would not stop the valuation or the disruption of the household. And the delay exceeds tomorrow morning. Anthony walked to the fireplace, though no fire had been lit. How many servants remain unpaid? 7 confirmed, possibly more. If the creditor proceeds, several will likely lose their situations at once. Some may recover part of what they are owed later, some may not. Anthony closed his eyes briefly. Rebecca was somewhere above or across the house, near enough to be summoned in minutes. He knew exactly what he had promised her. If circumstances arose that affected her, he would tell her. If action was needed, he would not use her name, her position, or their marriage as permission she had never given. He could call for her now. He could tell her that servants who had done nothing wrong might suffer because Sir Tobias had failed them. He could ask what she wanted done. Instead, another thought came first. It was their wedding day. To place the matter before her tonight would force her to choose between a principle she had demanded and people who might lose wages and employment. Anthony told himself that sparing her that choice was kindness. The thought was dangerously familiar. His father had always possessed reasons too. Anthony recognized the resemblance and still did not stop. The Highmead bond remains untouched, he said, entirely. Her settlement remains untouched. Yes, Your Grace, then this is one separate creditor. Carden watched him carefully. Yes, Anthony's hand tightened behind his back. Every statement was true. None answered the promise. Pay him, Anthony said, from my personal funds. Satisfy that account and no other. Carden remained silent for a fraction too long. Shall I inform Her Grace? Anthony looked toward the closed door. No. The word came quickly. He lowered his voice. Not tonight, Mr. Carden bowed. Very good, Your Grace. 2 days later, on 20 May, the creditor acknowledged satisfaction of the account and issued Sir Tobias Bromley an original receipt stating that payment had been made through Mr. Carden, agent to the Duke of Highmead. By the morning of the 24th May, Rebecca had begun to understand that marriage could acquire habits before affection acquired a name. Anthony still knocked before entering any room she used privately. He still asked, rather than assumed, whether she wished to dine alone with the Dowager Duchess or join him afterward in the smaller drawing room. He had not repeated the wedding carriage hand-holding, as though one freely given gesture had established a permanent right to another. That restraint had made Rebecca less guarded with him. It had also made the past 6 days unexpectedly easy, on the way to Ormsby House for Lady Teresa's garden breakfast. Anthony glanced at the formal invitation resting beside Rebecca on the carriage seat. 3 reminders. Perhaps Lady Teresa feared we would forget where she lived. I have known the house for years. Then she fears marriage has damaged your memory. Anthony looked at her. Has it? Not noticeably. You still remember when I disagree with you. Those occasions are unusually memorable. Rebecca smiled and turned toward the window before he could see how easily the exchange pleased her. The carriage stopped before Ormsby House. Anthony descended first and offered his hand. Rebecca accepted it without hesitation. The garden beyond the house had been arranged for fashionable ease. Striped awnings shading small tables, servants moving quietly between groups, spring flowers displayed with enough calculation to appear accidental. The Dowager Duchess joined them a moment later. Lady Teresa received them beneath an archway opening onto the lawn. She wore pale green and greeted Anthony with perfect composure. Your Grace, I had almost begun to believe newly married happiness would keep you away. You sent enough reminders to overcome it. Teresa's smile sharpened by a degree. Then I'm reassured. She turned to Rebecca. Your Grace. Rebecca had still not grown entirely accustomed to the title when spoken by people who had once called her Miss Bromley, but she answered without hesitation. Lady Teresa, you look remarkably settled. I am beginning to learn which staircase leads where. Domestic mastery already. I am ambitious. Teresa laughed lightly and moved on to greet another guest. Anthony leaned closer without touching Rebecca. Was that a truce? No, good. I was afraid I had misunderstood diplomacy. Rebecca glanced toward him. You should be more careful. You are a political duke. A terrible burden. They separated naturally when a gentleman approached Anthony. Rebecca remained near the Dowager Duchess and accepted conversation from two older ladies she knew slightly. Nothing seemed unusual until she saw Sir Tobias near the long breakfast table. He was speaking to a gentleman whose creditors Rebecca vaguely remembered her father mentioning once, and he looked far too pleased for a man whose household had recently been threatened with valuation. He noticed her and raised his glass. Rebecca returned the acknowledgement but did not go to him. Her father's cheerfulness lodged in her mind like a misplaced word in a familiar sentence. Teresa appeared beside her several minutes later. Sir Tobias seems in excellent spirits. Rebecca kept her gaze on her father. He often finds optimism shortly before other people discover the expense of it. Teresa's mouth curved. Marriage has not softened you. Was that expected? Circumstances sometimes encourage generosity. Rebecca looked at her then, and sometimes curiosity. Teresa did not pretend not to understand. She turned slightly, so that the small group nearest them could hear without the conversations appearing formally public. In that case, perhaps you will indulge mine. Anthony, still several paces away, looked toward them. Rebecca saw his attention change immediately. About what? Teresa opened her reticule. About a matter that has caused some confusion. She withdrew a folded paper. Rebecca saw only the edge at first. 6 days after your marriage, Your Grace, perhaps you can explain a receipt dated the 20th of May. The date struck Rebecca before the rest of the sentence did. 2 days after the wedding, Teresa unfolded the document but did not offer it into Rebecca's hand. One of Sir Tobias Bromley's creditors acknowledged full satisfaction of an overdue account. Payment was made through Mr. Carden, agent to the Duke of Highmead. Nearby conversation thinned. Rebecca felt the shift without looking around. She kept her eyes on the paper. The receipt appeared ordinary precisely because it was real. It named Sir Tobias as debtor. It recorded satisfaction. It named Mr. Carden. Rebecca knew the agent's name. She knew Anthony had been investigating whether servant wages could be protected. She knew he had promised to speak to her before acting. She had never seen this paper. May I read the date again? Rebecca asked. Teresa held it steady. Of course. The 20th of May 1817. Rebecca read the line twice. Then she looked at Anthony. He had already crossed part of the lawn. He stopped within speaking distance, but did not insert himself between the women. Rebecca knew his face well enough now to understand the absence of confusion. There was no suspicion there, no outrage at forgery, only a terrible stillness. Is the receipt genuine? She asked. Anthony answered immediately. Yes, the words seemed to alter the air. Rebecca heard a lady behind Teresa stop speaking mid-sentence. Somewhere to the left, a teaspoon touched porcelain and remained there. Did you order the payment? Rebecca asked. Anthony looked directly at her. I did. Teresa lowered the receipt slightly. Rebecca felt the humiliation not as heat but as clarity. She remembered Anthony's hand in hers on their wedding day. She remembered asking him not to decide in her name. She remembered his father, reasonable motives, broken promises. Sir Tobias had turned toward them now. His expression was not alarmed. It was relieved. That hurt nearly as much as Anthony's answer. A gentleman near the awning murmured something Rebecca could not catch, but she did not need the words. The story assembled itself too easily. Debtor's daughter marries Duke. 2 days later, creditor paid. 6 days later, proof displayed. Anthony spoke before anyone else could. My wife did not order that payment. His voice carried beyond the immediate circle. She did not ask me to make it. Teresa's brows rose. I have not accused her grace of signing an instruction. You asked her to explain an action she did not take. An action connected to her family. Rebecca turned to Teresa. Where did you get the receipt? Teresa looked at Sir Tobias. Your father gave it to me. Rebecca followed her gaze. Father. Sir Tobias approached with an air of reluctant concern. Rebecca, this needn't become a spectacle. You gave Lady Teresa this document. She asked whether certain pressures had eased, and you answered by giving her the receipt. It seemed harmless. The account was paid. By Anthony. Sir Tobias glanced toward the Duke. By the family into which you have married. There it was. Not a direct lie. Something more useful. Rebecca looked back at Teresa. What did my father tell you? Teresa folded the receipt once, carefully. Only that your marriage had eased certain pressures, Sir Tobias added, which it plainly has. Rebecca's hands remained still at her sides. Did either of you ask whether I knew the payment had been made? Neither answered immediately. Rebecca let the silence expose that fact. Until this moment, she said, I did not know. Several guests heard her. She made certain of it without raising her voice. The receipt is genuine. His Grace ordered the payment. I did not request it, and I did not know of it. Teresa's expression softened into something dangerously close to sympathy. That must be very distressing. Yes, Rebecca did not protect Anthony from the answer. It is. Anthony absorbed the words without flinching. Sir Tobias moved as though to speak, but Rebecca stopped him with a look. Not now. He looked offended. Rebecca no longer cared. Teresa slipped the original receipt back into her reticule. People will draw their own conclusions. They usually do. Rebecca looked at the nearest guests, then back at Teresa. But a conclusion is not improved by pretending it is a fact. The Dowager Duchess had come to stand several feet away. She did not intervene. Her presence alone ended the last pretense that this was harmless gossip. Anthony looked at Rebecca. Would you like to leave? The question was quiet, not an instruction. Rebecca nodded once. Yes. He offered his arm. She looked down at it. On another day, she might have taken it. 6 days earlier, she had taken his hand freely in a wedding carriage because he had promised not to assume what she had not chosen. Now that promise stood between them. No, she said. Anthony's arm lowered immediately. Of course. Rebecca walked beside him through the house and out toward the waiting carriage without touching him. No one tried to stop them. On the journey back to Kingscote House, Anthony did not explain. Rebecca was grateful for that much. She needed anger to remain her own long enough to understand it. When the carriage stopped, she entered the house ahead of him and went directly to the small drawing room. Anthony followed, only after a pause. Rebecca waited until he came inside. Then she closed the door herself and faced him. What else? She asked. Have you promised me that you intend to decide does not count? Anthony did not answer immediately. He stood several feet inside the closed drawing-room door, still wearing the dark coat he had worn at Ormsby House, his face stripped of every social expression Rebecca had watched him use among strangers. "Nothing else," he said at last. "There is nothing else I have promised you that I mean to disregard." Rebecca held his gaze. "That is not what I asked." A flicker of pain crossed his face. "No," he moved no closer. "Then ask me what you need to know." Rebecca looked toward the window rather than at him. Outside, a carriage passed along the street, ordinary and distant, while the room seemed to contain nothing except the receipt she no longer held and the promise she could still hear. "Did you remember what I asked you before we married?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. Rebecca turned back. "Could you have told me before you acted?" Anthony's jaw tightened. "Yes." "Then why did you decide for me?" That question stopped him. For several seconds he said nothing. Rebecca let the silence remain. She had spent too many years rescuing other people from difficult answers by giving them easier words. Anthony would have to find his own, because acting was easier for me than trusting you with the choice, he said finally. The honesty hurt more than an excuse would have done. Rebecca felt it settle precisely where anger had been trying to protect her. "Explain." Anthony drew a slow breath. "Carden returned on our wedding evening. The creditor had refused further delay. 7 servants were confirmed as being owed wages. Paying those wages directly could help them, but it would not stop the valuation or prevent some of them from losing their situations. I knew most of that before the wedding. You knew the danger. You did not know the final deadline, because you did not tell me." "Yes." Anthony looked down briefly, then back at her. "I told myself that I was not touching the Highmead bond. I told myself that your settlement remained untouched. I told myself the money was mine, the creditor was separate, and the purpose was to prevent harm to people who had not caused your father's debts." Rebecca's voice stayed quiet. "All true. Yes, and none of it was the question." His expression changed. "No." Rebecca folded her arms, not defensively, but because she needed somewhere to put her hands. "Your father had reasonable reasons too." Anthony went still. She saw the words strike exactly where she intended. "He always had an explanation," she continued. "Politics was urgent. A relative needed Highmead Park. A household decision seemed too important to leave where he had promised it would remain." Anthony closed his eyes for a moment. "Yes, you told me that was the danger. Not dishonesty in the obvious sense. The belief that a good motive made a broken promise something else. I remember. And then you did it." He opened his eyes. "Yes." The room held the answer without defense. Rebecca had expected anger to make this confrontation easier. Instead, Anthony's refusal to protect himself forced her to face the more difficult truth. She still cared what happened to him. She still remembered his hand holding hers in the wedding carriage. That did not make the breach smaller. It made it matter more. "Did you believe I would refuse to help the servants?" she asked. "No." "Then what did you think I would do?" "I thought you might feel trapped into agreeing." Rebecca stared at him. Anthony continued before she could speak. "If I came to you on our wedding night and said that 7 servants might lose wages or employment unless I paid the creditor, what freedom would you have felt in saying no? More than I had when you never asked." The words landed. Sharply, Anthony accepted them. "Yes." Rebecca looked away. "You decided that, because the choice would be painful, I was better without it." "Yes." He took one step toward the table, then stopped there rather than approaching her. "Rebecca, I broke my word to you." She looked at him again. "Do not say that simply because it is the sentence I want. I am saying it because it is true." His voice lowered. "I am not sorry because Teresa found the receipt. I am not sorry because your father used it. I am not sorry because London may misunderstand what happened. I am sorry because before any of those things existed, I knew what I had promised you and chose to act without you." Something tight in Rebecca's chest shifted, but not enough to become forgiveness. "Can the payment be undone?" "No." "Why?" "Because the account was genuinely satisfied. Sir Tobias received the benefit. To pretend otherwise now would require another falsehood." Rebecca nodded once. "Good." Anthony's brows drew together. "Good? I do not want you fixing one breach by manufacturing another." "Neither do I." Silence returned. Anthony's right hand rested on the edge of the table. He did not reach for her. "Carden has also heard that your father has begun telling people the marriage has eased his difficulties," he said. "How many people?" "I do not know yet." "What exactly has he said?" "Only what Carden heard second-hand, that matters are becoming easier now that the families are joined." Rebecca felt the old precision of her father's language move through her memory. Easier, joined. Not one explicit lie, only enough empty space for someone else to supply the conclusion. "He will use the payment," she said. "Yes, Teresa already has." "Yes." Rebecca walked to the table and looked down at its polished surface. "I do not want you to confront my father." Anthony was silent for half a beat. "All right. I do not want you to threaten Teresa." "I will not." "I do not want you to arrange some grand correction before I decide what I think should be corrected." "Understood." Rebecca looked up. "I need the truth, not a solution." Anthony nodded. "Then I will give you the truth. And time." "Yes." He stopped himself before adding anything else. Rebecca noticed. Once, he might have said she could take as much time as she needed, as though he were granting something. Now he simply accepted what she had asked. The change was small. It mattered. His hand remained on the table, palm open now, resting between them. He had not turned it toward her dramatically. He had not offered it in words. It was simply there, still and available. Rebecca looked at it. She remembered refusing his arm at Ormsby House. He had lowered it immediately. She remembered the wedding carriage and the difference between being held and choosing to be held. Anthony did not move. At last, Rebecca placed only the tips of her fingers against his palm. His breath changed. He did not close his hand around hers. "This is not forgiveness," she said. "I know. It does not mean nothing changed. I know." Rebecca let her fingers remain there for several seconds. Then, when she did not withdraw, Anthony slowly curved his hand beneath them, without trapping them. The gentleness of it nearly hurt more than anger had. "I am still furious with you," she said. "You should be. Do not agree with everything, simply because you are guilty." A faint, exhausted humor touched his face. "I will try to choose my agreements more carefully." Rebecca almost smiled. She did not give him that yet. Instead, she lifted her hand. Anthony released it at once. "Tomorrow," she said, "I will see my father." His posture sharpened. "Do you want me there?" "Nearby." "Where?" "In the adjoining room." Anthony waited. Rebecca continued. "I will begin alone. If I want you to come in, I will ask." For one instant, she saw the instinct in him, to object, to protect, to suggest a safer arrangement. Then he let the instinct pass. "Very well." Rebecca moved toward the door. Her hand rested on the handle before she looked back. "And Anthony?" "Yes." Do not mistake my asking you to stay nearby for needing you to speak for me. His eyes held hers. I will not. Rebecca opened the door. For the first time since leaving Ormsby House, she believed him enough to test the promise again. Sir Tobias arrived at Kingscote House on the afternoon of the 26th May, wearing the expression of a man who had come prepared to forgive everyone except himself. Rebecca received him in the smaller drawing room with the adjoining door left partly open. Anthony was beyond it, exactly where she had asked him to remain. He had not argued. He had not suggested a footman, solicitor, or family witness. He had only asked, "If you need me, will you call?" Rebecca had answered yes. That agreement steadied her now as Sir Tobias entered and looked first at her, then at the room, then toward the partially open door, as though assessing how much of Kingscote authority might be listening. "Your Grace," he said. The title was correct. The tone still managed to imply that he had known her before everyone else. "Father." Rebecca indicated the chair opposite hers. "Thank you for coming. Your note suggested I had little choice." "You had a choice. I simply made clear that I would not postpone the conversation." Sir Tobias sat, very ducal, no, very tired. His brows drew together. "Of what?" "Being made responsible for meanings I did not create." The answer silenced him for 1 second. Rebecca used it. "You gave Lady Teresa the receipt." Sir Tobias leaned back. The receipt was genuine. "I know. Then there is no scandal in my giving it to her. That depends entirely on what you wanted her to believe." His face hardened. "You are beginning from an accusation." "I am beginning from a question. What did you tell her?" "She asked whether circumstances had improved since your marriage. And I said they had." "How?" "Rebecca, one of my creditors was paid by your husband's agent. Must we make arithmetic philosophical?" "You did not answer the question." He gave a short, impatient breath. The account was satisfied. That eased pressure. "And what did you tell her about my involvement?" "I did not claim you signed an instruction. That was not what I asked." Sir Tobias looked toward the window. Rebecca waited. She had spent years learning the shape of his evasions. He rarely lied directly when implication would do more work. "Father." His gaze returned to hers. "Did you tell Lady Teresa that I asked Anthony to pay that creditor?" "I told her what any sensible person would understand." Rebecca felt the old ache of recognition, which is that marriage joins interests. Again, her voice stayed calm. "Did you tell her I asked him?" "Not in those words." "Did you tell her I knew I did not discuss every detail?" Rebecca's fingers tightened once in her lap, then relaxed. "What phrase did you use?" Sir Tobias's expression altered almost imperceptibly. He had not expected that question. Rebecca leaned forward. "You always choose a phrase when you want a conclusion to sound respectable. What did you say?" "This is absurd." "What did you say?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I said the arrangement had substance." Rebecca became very still. "The arrangement?" "Yes." "What arrangement?" Sir Tobias' patience thinned. "Your marriage. My marriage is not a financial arrangement with you. Do not be childish." "Then explain it, precisely." Rebecca rose, not to dominate him, but because sitting suddenly felt too close to the old version of herself who had listened while he defined her duties. "What arrangement did I make with you? What conversation took place in which I agreed that Anthony would pay your creditors?" There are understandings in families that need not be written out like contracts. There are assumptions in families too. That does not make them agreements. Sir Tobias stood. "You benefited from avoiding the humiliation of having your father's household broken up. That is not the same as consent. The servants benefited, yes. Then why are you determined to make a moral offense of generosity? Rebecca almost smiled, though there was no humor in it. Because generosity was not the part you gave Lady Teresa. You gave her the impression that my marriage carried a price. You are overdramatic. No, I am finally being exact. Sir Tobias looked toward the adjoining door again. Has Highmead taught you to speak to your father this way? Anthony has taught me nothing about you that I did not already know. Then perhaps he has encouraged ingratitude. He made his own mistake. I have already told him so. That surprised Sir Tobias. You confronted him. Rebecca heard the disbelief beneath the question. Yes, and he tolerated that. Something in her anger became suddenly clear. You still think respect is permission granted downward. Her father's mouth tightened. I think a daughter owes loyalty. Loyalty is not the same as being useful. I have never used you. The lie was so complete that Rebecca did not answer immediately. She saw herself outside Kingscote House again, reticule in hand, carrying words Sir Tobias had refused to speak himself. You sent me to apologize for your debt. I sent you because you could help this family. You sent me because you knew I would be received more gently than you. And were you not, that does not make it honorable. Sir Tobias' face flushed. Everything you now possess began because I sent you through that door. Rebecca looked at him and finally understood why he needed that version of events. If he had arranged her future, then her marriage remained an extension of his cleverness. If Anthony had chosen her independently, and Rebecca had accepted under her own terms, then Sir Tobias had done nothing except send his daughter to bear a shame that was his. You sent me to apologize for you, she said. Do not confuse that with giving me a future. Silence held between them. Rebecca continued before he could reshape it. From this day forward, you will not use my name to obtain credit. Sir Tobias stared. You will not imply that the Duke of Highmead guarantees your obligations. You will not seek introductions by suggesting that access to me gives access to Anthony. You will not solicit money through my title. You will not tell anyone that my marriage created an understanding about your debts. You cannot dictate whom I know. No, I am telling you what you may not claim in my name. Rebecca, you have spent my name enough. The words landed more quietly than she expected. Sir Tobias looked at her as though she had broken some invisible family law. And if I refuse, then every time you use my name, I will correct you publicly. That answer unsettled him more than anger would have done. You would humiliate your own father. No, I would refuse to help you mislead people. There is very little difference in society. There is all the difference in truth. Sir Tobias reached for his gloves. His movements were controlled now, which Rebecca knew meant he was angrier than before. You will regret turning blood into terms. Blood did not stop you from turning me into an argument. He looked at her once more, then bowed. Your Grace, Father. Rebecca rang for a servant. She did not watch him leave. Only when the outer door closed did the tension she had been holding begin to leave her shoulders. The adjoining door remained partly open. Anthony had promised to stay where she put him until she asked. He did. Rebecca crossed the room and opened the door fully. Anthony stood near the far window. A book lay closed beside him. He had clearly not read a word of it. He looked at her face and said nothing for a moment. Then, is he gone? Yes. What do you need? The question struck with unexpected force. Not what happened. Not what shall I do. Rebecca walked toward him. Anthony remained still. When she reached him, she placed one hand lightly against the front of his coat. He did not touch her. Rebecca closed the final distance herself and rested her forehead against his chest. Only then did Anthony lift his arms around her, slowly, carefully. Rebecca let herself lean into the embrace. His hand settled between her shoulder blades. Nothing in the gesture tried to fix what had happened. It simply held space for the fact that she had done something difficult and had chosen where to go afterward. "I wanted you here," she said. Anthony's arms tightened slightly. "Rebecca." She lifted her head enough to look at him. "That is different from needing you to do it for me." His gaze held hers. "Yes, remember that. I will." A knock sounded from the outer room before either moved farther. Anthony released her as soon as she shifted back. A footman entered carrying a sealed note for Her Grace, delivered by Sir Tobias Bromley's solicitor. Rebecca took it. The paper was brief. On the 2nd of June, creditors and their solicitors would meet at Bromley House while household goods were being valued and arrangements for sale considered. Sir Tobias would attend. Rebecca read the date twice. Anthony watched her face. "What is it?" She handed him the note. "We are going back," he read silently. Rebecca looked toward the closed door through which her father had just left. In 1 week, she would return to the house where she had learned to speak apologies that were never hers. This time, she would not be going there to carry anyone's shame. By the afternoon of the 29th of May, Rebecca had stopped trying to decide whether the coming meeting at Bromley House would feel more like a return or a reckoning. The distinction seemed less useful each time she considered it. What mattered now was not how the room would feel, but what truth would survive inside it. Mr. Carden stood in Anthony's study, with one hand resting on a folded memorandum. Anthony had left the chair at the head of the table empty. Rebecca noticed that before she sat, it was a small choice, perhaps even an unconscious one, but lately she had learned to measure him by the space he did not automatically occupy. "Mr. Carden," she said, "I do not need every detail of the payment repeated. I need only to know what you can state from your own knowledge." "Of course, Your Grace. Who instructed you to satisfy the creditor? Did I send you any note?" "No." "Did anyone tell you I had requested payment?" "No." "Before the receipt was shown at Ormsby House, did you have any reason to believe I knew the account had been satisfied?" "None." Rebecca nodded. "That is enough." Mr. Carden glanced toward Anthony. "There is one other point, Your Grace. The funds came directly from His Grace's personal account." "I know." Rebecca did not allow the fact to comfort her. It had never been the source of the injury, and I do not want that presented as though it makes the decision harmless. Anthony's expression tightened, but he answered before Carden could. "It will not be." Mr. Carden inclined his head. "Then I understand." When he left, Anthony's solicitor arrived with a short note confirming what had already been established. The original Highmead bond remained in secure custody. It had not been cancelled, discharged, altered, or replaced. If Rebecca wished, the same original document could be brought to Bromley House on the 2nd of June so that no one could honestly claim her marriage, had extinguished Sir Tobias's principal obligation to Highmead. "Bring it," Rebecca said. The solicitor bowed. "I will." Anthony waited until the door closed behind him. "Then the simplest statement is that your marriage discharged none of your father's debts." Rebecca looked at him. "No." Anthony paused. "No, that is the simpler statement. It is not the truer one." He understood almost immediately. "Because I paid one." "Yes." Rebecca rose and walked to the window. The day was bright enough that the glass returned a faint reflection of the room behind her. "If I stand in Bromley House and say my marriage brought my father no financial relief. I will be doing exactly what he has done. I will be selecting the part of the truth that helps me and asking everyone else to ignore the inconvenient part. The Highmead bond remains outstanding. Yes, your settlement remains separate. Yes. You did not authorize the payment. Also, yes, Rebecca turned. But a creditor was paid. He was paid because you chose to act after marrying me. That fact exists whether I like what people have made of it or not. Anthony was silent. Rebecca continued. I will not clear my name by teaching people to ignore the inconvenient part of the truth. Something changed in his face, not surprise. Respect, perhaps, but stripped of admiration's easier warmth. Then what do you want said? Very little. Rebecca returned to the table. You speak first. Anthony's gaze sharpened. About the payment. About your promise. The silence that followed was different from hesitation. He knew the cost immediately. You want me to say that you asked me not to settle your father's other creditors? Yes, and that I did it anyway. Yes, before anyone questions Sir Tobias, especially before. Anthony looked down at the memorandum Mr. Carden had left behind, though there was nothing written there that could make the answer easier. That will make the room believe you and I were divided. We were divided. Rebecca's voice remained calm. For one decision, pretending otherwise would only give my father another useful fiction. Anthony looked back at her. You are right. Do not say it because you think agreeing with me is safer now. I am not, he stood. I am saying it because if I ask that room to believe you had no part in my decision, I must first stop protecting myself from what that decision says about me. Rebecca felt the words settle somewhere deep. This was what repair looked like when it was not sentimental, not repeated apology, cost. Then that is your part and yours. I will ask my father one question, only one. If he answers it honestly, one is enough. Anthony waited. Rebecca did not give him the whole wording immediately. She wanted to hear whether it still held when spoken aloud. I will ask him when I requested that you pay his creditor. Anthony's expression changed. He will evade. Of course, he will talk about family connection. Yes, he will say the marriage changed his position. Probably. Rebecca folded her hands. That is why I will not argue every sentence. I know his habit. He changes the shape of a word until responsibility belongs to someone else. If I keep asking the same question, eventually he must either answer it or reveal that he cannot. Anthony's mouth moved faintly. I would not wish to be examined by you. You already have been. Painfully, and yet you survived. Barely. The small humor between them disappeared when a servant entered with another note. Anthony broke the seal and read it first, then handed it to Rebecca. It came from Sir Tobias' solicitor. Lady Teresa Ormsby had asked to attend the 2nd of June meeting as a friend of the family, having been involved in what had become a matter of public misunderstanding. Rebecca read the line twice, a friend of the family. That is one description. She will bring the receipt. Anthony looked at her. You think so? Why else attend? Rebecca folded the note. Good, good. If we try to avoid the receipt, we make it look dangerous. It is dangerous. To us, yes, not to the truth. She laid the note beside Carden's memorandum. Let her bring it. Anthony was quiet for a moment. And if she describes the payment as evidence that you married to relieve your father, then she will have to distinguish what she knows from what she prefers people to infer. She may refuse. Then that will be visible too. Anthony came around the table, stopping several feet away. What do you want me to do if Sir Tobias turns on you? Rebecca looked at him. Nothing unless I ask. The answer cost him less than it once would have. Very well. And if Teresa tries to provoke you, I will remember that ducal outrage is usually louder than useful. Excellent. I have been studying. Rebecca almost smiled. Anthony's expression softened, then grew serious again. There is something else. What? I would rather lose the good opinion of every person in that room than ask you to make the truth smaller, for my sake. The simplicity of the sentence struck harder than a vow. Rebecca looked down and noticed a loose thread at the edge of his cuff. Without thinking, she reached toward it, then stopped just before touching him. May I? Anthony's eyes dropped to her hand. You may. Rebecca pinched the thread between two fingers and smoothed it flat against the cloth. Her mother's scissors were not with her. They remained among her personal things, where they had been since the last time she used them. There, she said, you looked untidy. A threat to the dukedom, potentially catastrophic. Her fingertips stayed at his wrist for one brief second longer than necessary. Anthony did not turn the contact into anything more. He simply let her choose when to withdraw. Rebecca did. On the second, she said, you speak before I question my father. I will, even if people think less of you. Anthony met her eyes, especially then. Rebecca believed him, not because he had never failed her, but because this time he was choosing the difficult truth before anyone forced him to. On the evening of the 1st June, Kingscote House seemed quieter than usual, as though even the servants understood that tomorrow would require more truth than ceremony. Rebecca Hatt sat in the smaller drawing room with a book open in her lap and had not turned a page in nearly 10 minutes. The meeting at Bromley House would begin the next morning. Anthony would speak first. Mr. Carden would confirm where the payment instruction had come from. Anthony's solicitor would bring the original uncancelled Highmead bond. Teresa would almost certainly bring the genuine receipt. Everything necessary had been arranged, yet Anthony had been standing near the mantel for several minutes with the expression of a man whose most difficult preparation had nothing to do with creditors. Rebecca closed the book. You are wearing a path into the carpet. Anthony stopped. I have moved twice, both times with great intensity. Then I am fortunate the carpet is well made. She waited. He looked at her, then toward the fire, then back again. Rebecca recognized the hesitation. It was not uncertainty about whether to speak. It was the effort of deciding how much shelter to remove from the words. There is something I do not want to carry into Bromley House tomorrow without telling you first, he said. Rebecca set the book aside. Then tell me tonight. Anthony came to the chair opposite hers, but did not sit immediately. When I asked you to marry me, I did not love you. Rebecca lifted one brow. You continue to possess an extraordinary instinct for romantic openings. His mouth curved faintly. I considered beginning elsewhere and decided honesty was less dangerous. No, I decided you would notice if I avoided the point. You are learning. Anthony sat. The humor left his expression, though not the warmth. I respected you. I remembered you before the morning at Kingscote House, because you had been willing to disagree with me when there was nothing to gain from it. Then your father sent you to apologize for his debt, and I watched you try to carry something that had never belonged to you. Rebecca's fingers tightened lightly around one another. Anthony continued. I was angry for you. I was also selfish enough to see what I wanted in the same moment. A wife. A woman who would not spend her life agreeing with me because I am a duke. Rebecca looked at him steadily. That sounds exhausting. I have discovered that. She almost smiled. Anthony leaned forward slightly. But respect was not love, not then. The distinction mattered, and Rebecca was grateful he made it. Too much of her life had been spent around people who changed the names of things after the fact to make themselves look wiser than they had been. "When did it change?" she asked. Anthony was quiet for a moment. Not all at once. He looked down at his hands. "When you demanded terms instead of gratitude, I understood that you would rather risk security than surrender the right to define your own life. I admired you for it." Rebecca remembered the blue morning room and the weight of the promise he would later break. Anthony did not avoid that memory. In the carriage after our wedding, when you reached for my hand first, something changed again. His gaze lifted to hers. I had spent the morning reminding myself not to mistake marriage for permission. Then you chose me, in one small way without being asked. Rebecca felt the memory return with disarming clarity, his hand waiting. Her own palm turned upward, the quiet warmth between them as London passed beyond the carriage windows. Anthony's voice lowered. "And after I failed you, I understood more than I wanted to." Rebecca did not look away. "At Ormsby House, there, and afterward. When you refused my arm, I knew I had no right to resent it. When you confronted me, I knew you were telling me exactly where I had broken something I claimed to value." He paused. "But when you opened that adjoining door, after speaking with your father, and walked toward me yourself, I understood what I was afraid to lose." Rebecca's breath changed. Anthony's expression was entirely unguarded now. "Not a successful marriage, not your public confidence in me. You." Silence settled between them. Rebecca had expected, perhaps unfairly, that a duke declaring love would sound certain. Anthony did not sound uncertain of the feeling. He sounded uncertain only of what right he possessed to hope for an answer. That difference moved her more than confidence would have done. "I love you, Rebecca." The words were simple. No title stood between them. No argument followed. He did not explain why she should accept them. Rebecca felt the room narrow to his face and the quiet after his declaration. She had known affection was growing. She had known the anger at his betrayal mattered because he mattered. She had known, when she crossed the adjoining room and rested her forehead against his chest, that the comfort she wanted was not interchangeable with anyone else's. Still, hearing love named made everything sharper. She rose. Anthony stood immediately but remained where he was. Rebecca crossed the distance between them until only a small space remained. "I did not fall in love with you because you rescued me." His eyes held hers. "I know. I did not fall in love because you are a duke. I had hoped not. And I certainly did not fall in love because you paid my father's creditor." A flicker of rueful pain crossed his face. That would have been unfortunate. Rebecca almost smiled. Then she lifted her chin. "I fell in love with the man who stayed in the room when I told him he had hurt me, the man who stopped trying to make his intention the most important fact, the man who waited when I asked him to wait." Anthony's breathing changed. Rebecca let the truth arrive without ornament. "I love you too." For one heartbeat he did not move. Then he said her name very softly. "Rebecca." "Yes? May I kiss you?" The question warmed her more deeply than any assumption could have done. He was her husband. He had already heard her say she loved him. "Still?" he asked. Rebecca looked at his mouth, then back into his eyes. "Yes." Anthony remained still long enough for the answer to stay unmistakably hers. Rebecca closed the final distance herself. His hand rose to her cheek with deliberate care, and he bent toward her. The first touch of his mouth was gentle, almost reverent. Rebecca answered without hesitation. She placed one hand against his chest and felt the steady beat beneath his coat. Anthony did not pull her closer. He let her determine the space between them. When he began to draw back, Rebecca followed just enough to kiss him again. This time there was less uncertainty and more warmth. Anthony's other hand settled lightly at her waist only after she remained close. The kiss deepened only in feeling, never urgency. It carried no demand, no claim that love had erased what came before. Rebecca knew what he had done wrong. Anthony knew she knew. The tenderness between them existed because neither had required the other to pretend otherwise. When they parted, Rebecca left her hand against his chest. Anthony's forehead rested lightly against hers. "I had prepared more eloquent words," he murmured. "You were wise not to use them. Cruel woman, you had warning." 2 conversations and a debt negotiation were apparently insufficient. Rebecca smiled. For several seconds, neither moved. Then the knowledge of tomorrow returned. Bromley House, Sir Tobias, creditors, the original receipt, the original bond. Rebecca stepped back, though not far. "Tomorrow does not change because of this." "No, you still speak first." Anthony's expression grew serious immediately. "I will. You tell them I asked you not to settle my father's other creditors." "Yes. You tell them you gave me your word." "Yes. And that you broke it." "Yes." Rebecca studied him. "Even if the room thinks less of you." Anthony did not hesitate, especially if it costs me. Something in Rebecca settled completely then. Trust had once meant believing Anthony would never fail. That version had been easier and weaker. What she felt now was different. She knew he could make a wrong choice. She also knew he had learned not to hide behind rank, intention, or love when truth required a cost. Rebecca reached for his hand. This time there was no ceremony in it. Anthony closed his fingers around hers. "I am still going to question my father myself. I know, and if he tries to provoke you, I will attempt to remember that ducal outrage is louder than useful, excellent. Your lessons have been severe. You appear trainable." Anthony laughed softly. Rebecca felt the sound through their joined hands. Outside the drawing room, the house continued its ordinary evening. A servant crossed the corridor. A door closed somewhere above them. Nothing about the world had changed because 2 people had said they loved each other. Rebecca found that reassuring. Love was not an escape from tomorrow. It was simply one more truth they would carry into it, honestly. Anthony lifted her hand slightly, but did not kiss it, perhaps sensing that another gesture would turn tenderness into performance. "Are you afraid?" he asked. Rebecca considered the question. "Yes, so am I." She looked at him. "Of my father, of failing you again when it matters." The confession was quieter than the first. Rebecca squeezed his hand once. "Then do not protect me from the truth." Anthony's gaze held hers. "I will not." The next morning, Bromley House would already be under valuation when they arrived. Rebecca knew the numbered furniture, the solicitors, the creditors, and Lady Teresa's receipt would make the old house feel smaller than memory. Tonight, however, Anthony did not offer to fight the room for her. He simply stood beside her, hand in hers, and waited for morning. By 10 o'clock on the morning of the 2nd of June, Bromley House had begun to look less like Rebecca's childhood home, and more like an account being translated into objects. Small numbered slips had been tied to several pieces of furniture awaiting valuation. 2 paintings had already been removed from the wall, leaving pale rectangles behind them. A silver cabinet stood open and nearly empty. Nothing had been smashed or seized dramatically. The quiet order of it was worse in some ways. Every chair, frame and table now possessed a number. Because Sir Tobias's promises had finally become arithmetic, Rebecca entered with Anthony beside her and felt the old house recognize her before anyone in it did. Here was the front hall where she had learned to lower her voice when creditors called. Here was the drawing room where her father had rehearsed apologies until they sounded like family duty. Today she wore no shame into it. Sir Tobias had chosen the larger drawing room for the meeting. His solicitor stood near a writing table with the several lists already prepared. 3 creditors were represented, 2 by solicitors and 1 in person. Mr. Carden had arrived before them. Anthony's solicitor, Mr. Bellamy, carried a sealed leather portfolio containing the same original Highmead bond that had left Kingscote House under cover weeks earlier and remained in his custody ever since. 2 long-serving Bromley servants had been asked to remain because the arrangements for unpaid wages affected them directly. Teresa Ormsby sat near the windows beside an older married acquaintance, composed in pale blue, her reticule resting in her lap. Rebecca knew what was inside it. Sir Tobias rose when she entered. "Your Grace." He gave Anthony a deeper bow. "Highmead, Sir Tobias." Anthony's tone was correct and nothing more. Tobias glanced around the room. "I had hoped today might remain practical. There is enough unpleasantness without turning a financial arrangement into a family spectacle." Rebecca looked toward Teresa. "You invited Lady Teresa." His mouth tightened. "She has been drawn into the misunderstanding." Then she should hear it corrected. Teresa's expression did not move. Sir Tobias opened his mouth, but Anthony stepped forward before he could answer. Rebecca felt the shift in the room immediately. A duke speaking first ensured attention. Anthony had once used that power instinctively. Today he used it against himself. "Before anyone discusses Sir Tobias's present arrangements," he said, "there is one fact I need stated without ambiguity." He looked neither at the creditors nor at Teresa first. He looked at Rebecca. "Before our marriage, Her Grace asked me not to settle Sir Tobias Bromley's other creditors merely because she became my wife. I gave her my word." The room became still. Anthony continued. "On the evening of our wedding, I broke that word. I instructed my agent to satisfy one separate creditor from my personal funds. My wife did not ask me to make the payment. She did not know I had made it. The decision was mine." Sir Tobias shifted in his chair. "Your Grace, surely no one expects you to describe assistance to a family connection as though it were wrongdoing." Anthony turned toward him. "My wife expected me to keep my word." Tobias's face changed. Anthony's voice remained level. "I believed the prospect of harm to unpaid servants justified acting without consulting her. I was wrong. The motive does not alter the fact that I chose for her where I had promised not to." Rebecca felt something tighten behind her ribs, not from pain this time, but from recognition. Anthony had said the same thing privately. Now he was willing to let other people think less of him for saying it publicly. He looked toward Mr. Carden. "Carden." The agent stepped forward. "Your Grace, who instructed you to make the payment?" "You did." "Did Her Grace send you any instruction?" "No." "Did anyone tell you she had requested it?" "No. Before the Ormsby breakfast, did you have reason to believe she knew the account had been satisfied?" "No." Anthony nodded once. "Thank you." Teresa rose then, smooth and composed. "No one has accused Her Grace of writing the instruction herself." Rebecca turned toward her. "You ask me to explain the payment before a garden full of people." Teresa held her gaze. "Because the timing invited explanation. The timing invited questions." not conclusions. Teresa opened her reticule and withdrew the same folded receipt she had displayed on the 24th of May. The document itself is not a conclusion. No, Rebecca said. It is genuine. The admission unsettled several people more than denial would have done. Teresa unfolded the paper. Then we agree that a Bromley creditor was paid through the Duke's agent 2 days after the marriage. Yes, and that the payment benefited Sir Tobias. Yes. Teresa's brows lifted slightly, as though Rebecca were helping her. Then perhaps the misunderstanding was understandable. Understandable is not the same as true. Rebecca looked toward Mr. Bellamy. The bond, please. The solicitor opened the sealed portfolio and removed the same original document Anthony had shown Rebecca on the 8th May. He did not pass it around the room. He held it before Sir Tobias's solicitor and the nearest creditor's representative, both of whom could identify the signatures and seal. This is the original Highmead bond executed by Sir Tobias Bromley, Mr. Bellamy said. It remains uncancelled. The principal obligation was not discharged by His Grace's marriage and has not been discharged since. Sir Tobias gave a faint, impatient sound. No one has claimed every debt vanished. Rebecca faced him. What have you claimed? That circumstances improved. At Kingscote House, when you sent me inside alone, you called carrying your apology a daughter's duty. His face hardened. That is irrelevant. After Anthony paid one creditor, you called the result a family benefit. It was. When Lady Teresa asked what the marriage meant financially, you told her the arrangement had substance. Teresa's eyes moved toward Tobias. He looked at Rebecca. You are repeating a private phrase as though it were a confession. I am asking you to define it. Rebecca took one step forward. What arrangement? Rebecca, which arrangement did I make, Father? Her voice did not rise. Name the conversation in which I asked His Grace to pay you. Tobias looked toward Anthony. Anthony remained silent. That silence mattered. Rebecca continued. Name the conversation. There are understandings between families that do not require every detail to be spoken. Then name the understanding. Your marriage connected the houses. Yes, the Duke knew my difficulties. Yes, and he acted, without my knowledge. Tobias's jaw tightened. That is what he says. Anthony moved slightly, but Rebecca spoke before him. Mr. Carden says it. I say it. And you knew, before Lady Teresa showed me that receipt, that I had not instructed the payment. Tobias's eyes flashed. Rebecca did not let him escape into anger. Did I ask Anthony to pay that creditor? You benefited from avoiding the disgrace of a valuation at the time. That was not my question. You are twisting this. No, I am narrowing it. Rebecca held his gaze. Did I ask him to make the payment? Silence. One of the creditor's solicitors looked down at his notes. Teresa did not move. At last Sir Tobias said, No. Rebecca let the word remain. Did I know the payment had been made before Lady Teresa showed me the receipt? His face had reddened. No. The answer was quieter. Rebecca turned toward Teresa. Who gave you the original receipt? Sir Tobias. Did I? No. Did His Grace? No. Did anyone tell you I had requested the payment? Teresa's composure tightened for the first time. Sir Tobias allowed me to understand that the marriage had changed his position. That was not what I asked. Teresa's eyes cooled. No, no one told me that you personally requested it. Rebecca nodded. You were free to expose my husband's real mistake. He has exposed it himself. You were not free to give me knowledge, intention, or agreement that I did not possess. Teresa looked around the room. Sir Tobias gave her no rescue. Anthony gave her less. At last she said, Then I withdraw any suggestion that Her Grace requested. knew of or consented to the payment before it was made. The words were reluctant, but they were clear. Rebecca felt no triumph, only the absence of a weight she had carried too long. Sir Tobias sank back into his chair. "Have you finished humiliating your father?" Rebecca looked around at the numbered furniture, the missing silver, the servants who had waited for wages while he preserved appearances. "No one here needed me to humiliate you. Your debts were already here." Anthony stepped beside her then, not ahead. "And my error was already mine," he said. "Her Grace was right to condemn it. My rank does not make her responsible for a decision I made alone." Rebecca looked at him. Their eyes met. Nothing more needed saying between them. Mr. Bellamy returned the original Highmead bond to the sealed portfolio. Teresa handed the same original receipt to Sir Tobias's solicitor, who placed it with the settlement papers. Each document went where it belonged. Each responsibility followed it. The meeting turned back toward valuation, outstanding wages, and arrangements for sale. Rebecca remained only long enough to hear that the servants' claims would be addressed before several less urgent household expenses. Then she rose. Anthony offered his hand. This time Rebecca placed hers in it without hesitation. They crossed the front hall together, passing the spot where, years earlier, she had first learned to listen for creditors before entering a room. Outside, the carriage waited in the June light. Anthony looked at her. "Would you like to go back to Kingscote House?" Rebecca glanced once at Bromley House, then at him. "Do you still wish to take me to the opera next week?" Something warm entered his face. "Very much." Rebecca stepped toward the carriage. "Then yes, take me home. We have an opera to attend." On the evening of the 9th of June, Rebecca entered the King's Theatre on Anthony's arm and discovered that public vindication was quieter than public suspicion. No one applauded. No room fell silent. No hostess hurried forward to confess that society had judged too quickly. Instead, men who had once watched her with speculative curiosity bowed correctly. Women who had avoided conversation after the Ormsby breakfast now greeted the Duchess of Highmead without hesitation. The ordinary nature of it mattered. Rebecca had spent too much of her life measuring safety by other people's expressions. She had no intention of measuring dignity the same way. Anthony seemed to understand. He did not scan the boxes to see who approved of his wife. He did not watch for Teresa or Sir Tobias. He handed Rebecca into their box, greeted his mother, and asked whether Rebecca expected the tenor to redeem the second act. "You are asking me before he has sung a note. I am gathering evidence. A dangerous habit. I have been taught to value it." Rebecca looked at him. "Then remember that confidence is not proof. I married an unforgiving woman. You married a precise one." That was the more alarming possibility. The Dowager Duchess concealed a smile behind her fan. The orchestra began tuning below them, and conversation in the theatre shifted around the rising sound. Rebecca looked across the tiers of boxes. Teresa was not present. That absence required no dramatic explanation. Her retraction had travelled through the same drawing rooms where her insinuation had once prospered, and her parents had quietly removed her from the centre of the season before sympathy could become fresh gossip. She remained Lady Teresa Ormsby, daughter of an earl, protected by family and fortune. What she had lost was less theatrical and more exact. People no longer accepted her interpretation merely because she delivered it elegantly. Sir Tobias's consequences had been equally unspectacular. The valuation at Bromley House had already begun before the meeting, on the 2nd of June, and the arrangements for sale continued during the following week. Several household goods had been sold or assigned toward outstanding claims. The servants' wage claims had been addressed before less urgent household expenses wherever the available funds allowed. Sir Tobias had left the larger house and taken modest rented rooms beyond the fashionable centre. Anthony had neither forgiven nor secretly cancelled the Highmead bond. The original remained uncancelled in Mr. Bellamy's custody, to be handled through ordinary financial arrangements. The genuine receipt Teresa had displayed remained with Sir Tobias's solicitor among the settlement records. Each obligation had finally stayed attached to the person or transaction that created it. Sir Tobias had written to Rebecca 3 days earlier. The letter contained several references to filial feeling, 2 complaints about humiliation, and 1 carefully phrased acknowledgement that he should perhaps have been clearer with Lady Teresa. Rebecca had answered in 7 lines. She wished him health. She stated that she would receive ordinary correspondence from him. She repeated that her name and Anthony's credit were not to be used in obtaining money or introductions. She enclosed no funds. For once, the reply had contained no apology. The first act ended to warm applause. During the interval, an older woman Rebecca recognized as Lady Hartwell approached their box. She had known the Dowager Duchess for years and possessed the comfortable authority of someone too, established to fear temporary gossip. "Your Grace," she said to Rebecca, "tell me whether I am being unjust to the soprano." Rebecca smiled. "That depends upon what you think of her. Beautiful voice, very determined vibrato." Rebecca considered. "Then I think you are being charitable." Lady Hartwell laughed. "I suspected as much." They spoke for several minutes about the performance. Not Bromley House. Not the receipt. Not Sir Tobias. When Lady Hartwell moved on, Rebecca realized she had been waiting unconsciously for some reference to the scandal and had received none. Anthony looked at her. "What?" she asked. "Nothing." "That is rarely true. I was wondering whether you noticed." Rebecca looked toward Lady Hartwell disappearing into another box, that she asked my opinion instead of my history. "Yes, I noticed." Anthony's expression softened. "And?" Rebecca looked back at the audience below. "I think I prefer being ordinary. As a duchess, do not be difficult. I am trying to understand the scale of your ambition." Rebecca's smile came easily now. "Tonight, ordinary is ambitious enough." When the final curtain fell, the theatre released its audience slowly into corridors and staircases bright with lamps and conversation. A quieter side stair stood available to the ducal party. Rebecca saw it. Anthony saw it too. He said nothing. Ahead, the public staircase was crowded with silk, black coats, feathers, servants waiting below, and all the visibility Rebecca had once been expected to fear. She turned toward it. Anthony simply matched her pace. Halfway down, she glanced at him. "You did not suggest the other stair. You dislike having exits chosen for you." You remembered. "I am trainable, under severe conditions." "So I have been told." Rebecca placed her hand more securely on his arm, not because she needed help descending, but because she wanted the contact. Anthony looked down, once at her fingers, and then continued beside her without making the gesture larger than she had made it. Outside, their carriage returned them to Kingscote House beneath a mild June night. The Dowager Duchess retired shortly after they arrived. Rebecca left her cloak with a maid, but kept her reticule, and followed Anthony into the small drawing room while he finished reading a note from his secretary. He looked up. "I thought you might go upstairs. I considered it, and rejected the idea." Rebecca approached him. "You look untidy." Anthony glanced down at himself. "I have survived public disgrace, only to be defeated by tailoring. Do not be dramatic." A loose, dark thread showed at the edge of his cuff. Rebecca opened her reticule and took out the worn, russet leather case. Anthony's gaze dropped to it at once. She opened the case and removed her mother's small steel sewing scissors. The metal caught the firelight. "Your mother's," he said. "Yes." Rebecca looked at his wrist. Then she looked at him. "May I?" Something warm and almost tenderly amused passed through Anthony's face. He offered his wrist without hesitation. "You may." Rebecca steadied the cuff between two fingers and clipped the loose thread. Only the thread. Nothing else required repair. She closed the scissors and returned them carefully to the russet case. Anthony examined his cuff with mock solemnity. "Saved. Temporarily. I owe you my reputation." Rebecca gave him a warning look. "Do not begin attaching debts to me again." His laugh came low and immediate. "I withdraw the statement." She returned the case to her reticule. Anthony extended his hand toward her. The gesture was familiar now, but familiarity had not made it meaningless. He still offered. He still waited. Rebecca looked at his open hand and chose something else. She stepped closer, lifted her palm to his cheek, and kissed him first. Anthony went still for the briefest instant before answering. One hand settled gently at her waist. He did not pull her nearer than she had already chosen to stand. Rebecca kissed him with none of the uncertainty of their first time. There was affection in it now, and trust made more honest by having survived disappointment. When she drew back, Anthony kept his hand lightly at her waist. "I love you," he said. Rebecca touched her thumb to his cheek. "I love you too." His eyes moved briefly toward the russet case visible inside her reticule. "Your mother was right about repair," Rebecca considered. "About some things." "Not all?" "No." She lowered her hand from his face, but did not step away. "Repair is honorable when something is worth keeping. It is not a command to preserve every damaged thing." Anthony nodded. "Some things should be cut away." "Exactly. And some," Rebecca looked at him, at the man who had once believed keeping promises meant never failing, and had learned instead that integrity also meant refusing to hide when failure came. "Some earn the right to be repaired." His expression became quieter. "Which am I?" Rebecca pretended to consider. "Still under review." "Cruel woman. You knew that before you married me." "I suspected." Anthony bent slightly, then stopped. The pause was nearly invisible. Rebecca felt it anyway. She smiled and closed the final distance herself. Later, when they left the drawing room together, the little steel scissors rested safely in their case. The original bond remained with the solicitor. The debt remained with the man who had incurred it. Rebecca carried no apology, no message, and no borrowed shame. Beside her walked the man she loved, not because he had chosen her when she was powerless, but because when love demanded that power become restraint, he had learned to stand beside her and ask,